Oftentimes, parents come into our office asking the same questions as they present their children because they're having some type of an illness, some type of a problem. And the question is always, so how could this have happened? Well, tonight we're going to answer some of that question. In fact, parents, get ready, because in the end, part of the answer lies squarely in your lap, being your responsibility. Because in the end, we have to recognize that our children learn by what they see us doing, not just simply by the words that come out of our mouth. And therefore, it's really, really important that we recognize oftentimes we have to take personal account and responsibility for the choices that our children have made. Now, it's going to become a little bit more evident when you see the content from this. In fact, tonight, what I want you to do is I want you to be focusing on some of the research that we're going to present, some of the studies that we're going to talk about, because this isn't a chiropractic thing. This goes beyond the four walls of our chiropractic office. This is what we know as the truth behind some of the reason why our children develop their health problems. Now, first and foremost, we have to recognize one basic truth, that our posture happens to be a window into our spine and our nervous system. One of the beautiful things that we get to see all the time here at the Limerick Chiropractic Center is the fact that as we're doing our posture checks and then we're following up by looking within and looking at those x-rays, well, that outside window, our posture, is exactly what we see inside the body from the structure that's there. And in turn, it gives us that better understanding of some of the reason why. Now, let's understand something. That in the end, that this is something that holds true for each and every one of us. Whether it's me, whether it's you, whether it's your brother and sister down the road, whether it happens to be your children, this chart describes a truth that we see to be self-evident. It's called Embryology 101. As those cells come together within our mother's womb and eventually multiply and divide, the first thing that differentiates itself, in other words, the first system to become recognizable, happens to be your nervous system. And from there, the rest of the systems of your body form because that nervous system commands them to. If the nervous system doesn't form, well, game over. Nothing else is produced at that stage. So we realize that oftentimes as we look at that posture and we recognize that it's capable of being used as a window to look into this most delicate system, our nervous system, it helps us better understand where these problems come from. If you want to look this up, this is a really unique chart. It's called the Limerick chart. It's been in existence for quite a long time. There's well over 150 volumes or versions of Gray's Anatomy. This showed up in like the 29th edition of Gray's Anatomy. So it's been around for an awful long time. We recognize that this is how each and every one of us were formed and put together. Therefore, as we affect different parts of this picture, different parts of our spine, it has the ability to affect different parts of our body. And because our system, our nervous system, can be broken down into a process of cause and effect. When we have produced interference to that proper level of communication from our brain out to the systems, those tissues within our body, the effect is they don't work the way they're supposed to. Anything less than 100% is a state of disease. It's not okay. And yes, we don't get to feel the signs, we don't get to feel the symptoms right away. But over time, as we continue to erode the function of our body, guess what happens? Our body eventually talks to us. It gives us a signal. Now, some of us are smart enough to recognize that when it starts to talk to us and whisper those signals. Sometimes we choose to, well, ignore it. We choose to just simply say, hey, listen, if we ignore it, it'll eventually go away. And yes, your brain's not stupid. It will remove the signal. Sometimes we take a painkiller, whether it's over the counter or it happens to be prescription. It doesn't matter. It's going to block the signal. Some of you may self-medicate. Some of you may use other things in order to hide or mask. It doesn't matter. Once that interference is there, it's just like a cavity. It only continues to worsen with time. And it's not okay. So let's look at a couple of these things. And one of the really big things that happens to be a postural effect, which is called the forward head carry. Now, our children, they are subject to this condition more and more and more. If you have a 5, 6, 10-year-old, you recognize they're spending more and more time on electronics, more and more time with their head moving downward. And because we're affected by gravity, guess what? It continues to be magnified. Now, this isn't a chiropractic thing. You could pick up any physiology book, any biomechanical book. You could pull this up online, and you could see how gravity affects the amount of force that your body has to maintain and has to support as soon as your head goes forward. And I'll give you a really simple example. I mean, most of you have, some free weights at home, some dumbbells at home, and maybe you have a 5 or a 10-pound dumbbell. Well, let's use the 10-pound dumbbell because most of our heads are about 11, 12 pounds. Well, if we take that dumbbell and we put it right up against our chest, we could hold it there for a really long time. I mean, most of us can hold it there all day long if it's right up against our chest. But as soon as we take that dumbbell and we start to push it away from the center mass, from the center of our gravity, guess what ends up happening? Exponentially, that force becomes greater and greater and greater. And I dare say for many of you, if you're holding a 10-pound weight out, forward like this, it's not going to take very long for your arm to just come crashing down. Well, our children are doing this because of how they're being trained up. Yes, many of them have to carry a cell phone in school now. We label it for their protection so that we can watch and monitor where they're at. Maybe it's because the school has a system by which they track and monitor the kids so that they can use it as a hall pass and they're able to monitor to make sure of where they are within the school. It doesn't matter. None of our kids are given instruction on how to use this thing, on how to properly hold it up in front of their head at our eye level. As they're working in school, our children are never taught how to sit up properly. The horrible thing is that this process goes on for not years, but oftentimes decades before the ill effects are actually seen. This is what ends up happening. And we get trained to do this more and more and more. Cell phone use, iPad use, Chromebooks, regular books. We get into these bad positions more and more and more. But I'll tell you what, let's take a look at some of these studies, and I think that these are really interesting studies. This comes from the Annals of Rehabilitative Medicine, the effect of forward head posture and on postural balance in long-time computer-based workers. The short version is, the abstract of this is, listen, as you're in this bad position for a long period of time, you start to lose your balance. It affects how you're capable of maintaining balance within this system. Well, as chiropractors, we see this quite often from the standpoint that people start to raise one shoulder higher than the other. When we look at them from the side, their head starts to jut forward. Or maybe they look like they're a rocket that's about ready to launch. That everything, their hips go forward, their chest goes forward, their head goes even farther forward. But the mechanisms that are supposed to keep our body balanced, well, they're not able to work as properly as they're supposed to. And anytime we put ourselves into these bad positions, there's one thing that happens. Eventually, over time, we can't keep up with those bad postural changes. And if you've never watched our video on and seen the effects of poor posture and how it leads to falls, and those falls lead to fractures, and, well, we know where that takes us, to an early level of demise. We recognize that these poor postural decisions that are made in our childhood lead to devastating effects as we get older and older and older. Now, I'd love to say that's the bottom, that's the end of it, but, in this study on physical therapy science, it talks about the effects of poor posture and how it affects our respiration. Let's think. Our ability to breathe properly. Many of us have long since forgotten how to belly breathe. If you ever watch somebody who is in distress, how they breathe by raising their shoulders up instead of contracting their diaphragm. Well, contracting your diaphragm and breathing that way is absolutely impossible if, in fact, we're hunched and caved forward like that. And you would say, hey, doc, no, that couldn't happen. Let me tell you, we see children walking through the door all the time with that bad postural position. And we wonder why, in fact, our kids can't go out and play, why they can't run and exercise the way we would love to see them. It's because mechanically they can never inhale as fully as they're supposed to. And yeah, we could talk about the long-term effects, how it's going to lead to things like respiratory issues as far as, upper respiratory infections or pneumonia. The list just keeps going on and on. And it saddens me because these are things that don't have to be. And in fact, one of the things that eventually occurs is that as we have this bad posture and as our head is causing those muscles to simply be overwhelmed and fatigued, the bottom line is that eventually we get to a chronic pain syndrome. Now, maybe some of you out there, this is where you're at as a parent. Maybe some of you're thinking about your mom or dad or a coworker. Let's recognize that there's been an insult for such a long period of time that the nervous system is just overwhelmed. And the only way for it to deal with it is to continue to produce that pain signal. Well, if you're not aware, there's this small thing of an opioid crisis. I know it isn't in the news as much as it used to be, but let's be real and let's understand. Chronic pain is a gateway to utilizing these particular drugs and medication. And the sad thing is that, unfortunately, this process never has to get to this point. These are some of those simple reminders. Not that difficult. Utilizing a standing workstation, making sure that if you have to have a seated workstation that you get up, set up properly. And, we talk about this from ergonomics of an adult's workstation, but our children are no different. Are we teaching them how to, the three-step process of how to sit properly, to sit, slide, and back, to make sure that they're getting into that right mechanical position to protect their spine? Are we ensuring that they have those props to make sure that their books, their computers are at that right height to make sure that they're not constantly driving their chin down onto their chest, causing mechanical insult. These are some of those simple things. And in the end, our responsibility is to make sure that we're talking about these things, that we're sharing this information. And parents, that we're actually the example for our children. See, the one thing I recognize is that our children, they are going to learn more by what they see us doing and how we're doing things than by simply the words that are coming out of our mouth. I'm going to encourage you. Make sure you pick something to take action against. Make sure that you're being the example. Make sure that you're sharing this information with others. Because in the end, as you stop and you pause and you share this video, maybe you hit the like button, maybe you hit the share button, maybe you leave me a comment down below or ask a question on a specific topic. Realize somebody else is going to be gifted to learn in the process more about how they possibly can help their children. Somebody that they love and they don't want to see get to this point. The one thing I definitely know is that as your posture is a window into your spine, one of the most important things we can ever do is make sure that our families get checked. I didn't say get adjusted. I didn't say be under care. Get checked. I have no idea the condition of somebody's spine until the system is tested. I'm assured that because research has already been done, the average 4-year-old is going to have 4,000 impacts. I'm assured that many individuals who walk through the door aren't going to have lived in a bubble, in a glass house. They're going to have had the slips down the step, the falls, the traumas, the accidents. And in turn, if in fact that's occurred, the likelihood of having subluxation happens to be quite high. So the biggest thing that we can do is make sure that people get checked. Kids producing their health problems. Parents, I'm going to encourage you. Take charge. Be the example. I'm Dr. Joseph Baker from the Limerick Chiropractic Center.